All right, so this is mainly for second period. Here's the notes I gave you. By the way, my dogs are here. If they start fighting, that's what you hear in the background. My wife and I are not knocking each other out. It's the dogs. The main thing I want you to know here is about monopolies. Monopolies are where one company dominates all others or takes over all of them. And the problem with a monopoly is they can then charge as much money as they want for their products. There's no competition, and competition is the lifeblood of capitalism. And I always talk about the chicken sandwich graphic I show. That's capitalism for you. Everyone's got their chicken sandwiches out there at $3.99. McDonald's, the biggest dog on the porch, has theirs selling for $3.69, trying to undercut the number one sandwich right now, which I guess is Popeyes. That's competition. If there was only Zaxby's, which was the example I used in class, making chicken sandwiches, they could charge $15 for the sandwich. So competition is good, and that's what the capitalist countries want. Monopolies, trusts, and cartels work against that. The key thing about this is that, you're supposed to learn about the good and the bad thing of the Industrial Revolution. Also, just the characteristics about it. So the thing that I talked about in class was that for years and years, thousands of years, change only came out maybe once every 100, 150 years. Somebody would have did something new. Once the Industrial Revolution started, there was always someone trying to come up with a new invention. And in class today, I talked about cell phones. And of course, some of my kids said they liked their cell phone just fine. But I'm telling you about it, most people have 2-year contracts. And by the time 2 years has gone by, your phone is not the best thing out there. And so a lot of people just automatically plan on upgrading because you get new communication. It's faster. You got more storage. And as I mentioned today in class, the cameras keep getting better and better on your phones. So what you're going to see on the test tomorrow is that the speed of technological change is dramatically improved. Increases dramatically. Like we talked about the steam engine. Well, not long after that, it was applied to a railroad. After that, it was applied to steamships. All right, let's see. Population growth. Now, I talked about this quite a bit in 5th and 6th. So what you see here on this graphic is that the population is going up, correct? In the United States and in Europe. But now, there's a couple of factors here. And this is going to be on the test or the essays tomorrow. So a couple things are going on at the same time. Number one, people are not as fertile, men, I don't know, sperm and eggs, whatever the words are. The infertility is going up, and people are having less children, and women are working more now. They're not as home as much. So they're not home. They're off working a 14-hour day just like the men, and they're not home as much for their husband to come home and get them pregnant. So what's happening is fertility is going down. But at the same time, people are living longer and the death rates are going down. So the effect of the mortality rate dropping is a greater effect than the fertility rate dropping. So even though there's less babies being born, there's more people alive. I hope that makes sense. Why are there more people alive? They're eating better. Remember, I used the example about bananas in class, a couple days ago. Bananas are good for you, but they spoil really quickly. Well, now bananas can be transported further and sold cheaper because of the railroad, which is a technological improvement. So people are eating better. It's the reason they're living longer. And they're starting to immunize people, like the smallpox vaccine. And so people are just living longer. All right. Now, what this means here at the bottom, I didn't really mention this in class. Today, in most developed countries, the birth rate is very low. And so I talked about the United States. People are not replacing themselves. So if it wasn't for the southern hemisphere, obviously we're talking about Africa and South America, they are still having huge families in the southern hemisphere. Most of the northern hemisphere, Europe, North America, and Asia is very, very developed, and the families are not as big. We talked about how birth control for many years was unreliable. And I talked about the rhythmic method. I made a joke. And I said that people who believe in the rhythmic method are called parents. But what happened was there was a new invention. It was on your study guide, or a new discovery. And it is that you could use animal intestines as condoms. And the condom was the first efficient means of contraception. All right. So the urban environment. Now, I spent a lot of time on this. So I'm going to try and sum it up here, second period, just for you. So far, I've been telling you all the good things the Industrial Revolution has done. But most people have a very negative connotation of it. So here's what happens. People used to live out in farms. Now, they're poor, but they ate well because there's food everywhere, because they live on a farm. They live mostly in one-room huts with a dirt floor. So it's pretty dirty in there. And you went to the bathroom in a bucket, and either the bucket was kept out in the yard or kept inside. Once it got full, you went and threw it out. Well, once you move to the city to get a job, there's a couple things going on. Especially in Britain, they passed these laws that kick basically the poor people off the land. So they got nowhere to go except the cities. And it just so happens the cities at the time are hiring new factory workers. So people moved to the city. And I didn't say this in 5th and 6th, but in reality, their pay was probably in many ways higher working in the factories than it was out on the farm. The problem is they're crammed in these crowded apartment buildings. And the vocab word you need to know is tenement. 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 That are these apartment buildings. Now, they wouldn't have been 100 stories tall like they are now. They might have been 2 or 3 stories tall. But you get up on the 3rd floor, you have these huge farm families in there. They have like 8 people sleeping in the same bed. And I told the other classes, if you have 8 kids sleeping in the bed, somebody wets the bed, everybody gets wet. There was a lot of sexual activity going on there. Pretty disgusting. A lot of people are experimenting with sex with their brothers and sisters. One of the most disgusting things I ever read. I had to learn that. And so this is the bad part. And if you have to go to the bathroom, you do what you used to do back in. There's no running water in these buildings. What you do is you do what you did back in the country. You go in a bucket. And what they did, if you have 7 or 8 kids going in the same bucket, it's going to fill up pretty quick. So what they would frequently do is just throw it out the window. And, people would be walking by down below in the street and crap's being dumped on their head. Plus, once you get to the factories, yes, they might have made more money in the factories. The factories were dangerous. And if you, especially for women, if you had long hair, you would frequently get caught in a machine and a woman would be decapitated or her neck would be broken. People would have their arms cut off by this machinery. And nowadays, if that happened, you would get workman's comp. Back then, they fired you. So now you're unemployed and you're not going to get another job. And so also the pollution was really, really bad. Factories dump pollution into the air. They dump stuff in the rivers. And so even though there were some good effects about the Industrial Revolution, the living standards in the cities were probably very, very low. Much worse. And then I spent quite a bit of time talking about the migration patterns. And the big thing I keyed into here was the Irish. And what I told the classes today is you hear how bad the Africans were treated and the Native Americans were treated. Because the Irish and the Italians too were Catholic, the Protestant, English, and Scotch hated the Irish. And so they were treated really, really badly. And the English had taken over Ireland. And so the Irish people lived very poor for years. And then this potato famine hit. And the Irish basically lived off the potato. Remember, the potato's from South America. So the potato was discovered here, taken over to Europe, and it was a big hit in Ireland. So these people would eat potatoes for breakfast, lunch, and supper. So eventually there was this famine that caused the potato to die, and millions of Irish people starved, and then many of them entered the United States. They came here. And so I said, if you are white, whatever that word means, you are very likely to have a lot of Irish blood. There were more Irish here, apparently, than the English and the Scotch, and they were quite hated. And that's as far as I got. Now, I hope you're listening here. The multiple choice exam can be on anything in the notes and on the test. And anything, the test can be anything in the study guides or anything in the lecture, okay? But the essays, the DBQ or the SAQs, DBQ and SAQs will not be past transcontinental migration. I hope this makes sense. If not, you can email me.